Okay, so I'm not saying it's impossible to have a constitutional crisis, but we are not there yet. Once Trump says, I refuse to obey the federal court order, we're closer. And certainly if we get to the point of the U.S. Supreme Court ordering him to do something or to stop doing something, and he refuses, we're there. But right now, we're nowhere near there. And the thing that is really galling, and let me take it one at a time before I get to the really galling. I'm going to start with you on that piece, Rich. And I've been listening to some of your discussions with Andy on Trump's powers when it comes to money and the executive branch. But do you think we are now, as the media is telling us, at a constitutional crisis point?
No, of course not. And it's absurd to hear Democrats complaining about a hostile power grab of the executive branch by the chief executive, who is elected to be the chief executive, who is elected to administer his administration and has every right. Presidents have done this from time immemorial to have informal advisors or people close to him review how the government's working and advise them on it. Now, Elon Musk is a little bit more than that. He's an actual government employee, right? He's a special government employee. And it's more than just a think tank the way we thought maybe Doge would be. I mean, it's really an action squad that's going in and doing things. So the executive has a lot of discretion. He can fire people that he wants. He can redirect resources if Congress isn't very specific about how they're going to be spent, which applies to most of these USAID funds. So and as you point out, he's mostly being delayed, right? Congress is the courts are just looking at this. And we've all sort of now accepted like the Elon Musk pace of things. Like if it's delayed a week, it's a terrible defeat because everything needs to move fast. But in the scheme of things are still moving incredibly quickly, even with these little delays from the court. So you're right. If he defies a court order, we'll have a constitutional crisis. I don't see why he would feel compelled to do that. I think he should just fight this stuff out in the courts, and we will eventually have a big dispute over impoundment, because when Congress is not very specific, there's a lot of give in terms of how you spend the money, but whether you spend the money, that's a different question. And you got to spend a lot of it. You just can't zero it out when Congress has said, no, you're going to spend $40 billion. But Russ Vought and others have a theory that the Impoundment Act that Congress passed in the Watergate era is unconstitutional, and they want a test case to go challenge that. But that's, again, it's the tectonic plates of the two branches rubbing up against each other, and there's tension and there's give there, and you're going to need a determination by the courts on that eventually. But the idea that we're in a constitutional crisis because some federal employees have been placed on leave and courts are examining whether the executive has that authority or not. He does, but that's not a constitutional crisis.
No, it's not. And one of the things that they're upset about is J.D. Vance issued a post on Sunday on X. Literally, it was a Twitter post, okay? It was an X post, and it reads as follows. If a judge tried to tell a general how to conduct a military operation, that would be illegal, which is correct. If a judge tried to command the attorney general in how to use her discretion as a prosecutor, that's also illegal. Judges are not allowed to control the executive's legitimate power. He's 100% right about all of that. But that's not the same thing as saying, and therefore, we are going to defy the orders that have been issued against us. That's saying this initial order was wrong. We will appeal it, and it will be overruled. We are going to win on our legal fight that the Democrats started. But that's not how it's being spun, Charlie. Let me play you a little montage. I played you some top Dems with the new line, which is very clearly constitutional crisis to try to scare people. And naturally, the Democrat media is walking along in line. Watch.
We are 3 weeks into the second Trump presidency, 3 weeks, and tonight there are warnings that the U.S. is dangerously close to a constitutional crisis.
Constitutional law experts say this is the clearest sign that we might be creeping towards a constitutional crisis.
Yeah. Some legal experts say our country could be headed toward a constitutional crisis.
New warnings of a constitutional crisis just weeks into Trump's second term. So will the Trump administration comply with the courts? Or will the president drive the nation full steam ahead into a constitutional crisis?
I think he's causing a constitutional crisis intentionally.
Your take on it, Charlie?
Well, I don't think there's a constitutional crisis. If they ignore a court order, there might be, although there are a lot of checks and balances within our system that declaring anything a constitutional crisis at the first hurdle is often premature. The issue here in most of these cases is that a judge has indulged what David French used to call Trump law. In a sense, they've said the executive has these powers, but Trump's not allowed to exercise them. The way you deal with that as an administration is you take it to higher courts and you make your case. I think it might have been good politics if J.D. Vance had added one line at the end of his tweet saying, and we will win this at the Supreme Court. But not doing so doesn't constitute a constitutional crisis. I saw Sheldon Whitehouse, of all people, suggesting that criticizing the court system as J.D. Vance did is beyond the pale. Are you kidding me? This is a guy who has spent the last 5, 6, 7 years arguing that the Supreme Court is bought and paid for, is illegitimate, a member of a party that spent the Biden years contending that the Supreme Court was not, in fact, an equal branch of government, but was a stain on the system that could only be remedied by court packing. An idea so crazy that even Franklin Roosevelt was repudiated when he tried it in the 1930s. So as of yet, there is nothing that gets close to a constitutional crisis. And on the merits, I think the argument that's being made here is really odd in that the executive branch has been delegated a lot of authority in the realm of spending. Now, I don't think it should have. And I would go as far as to say, as you probably know, Megyn, that some of that delegation is illegal. I'm a non-delegator. I think the Supreme Court has allowed this to go too far. But it's been doing that since the 1930s. This did not start yesterday. If it was legitimate for Bill Clinton or George W. Bush or Barack Obama or Joe Biden to make spending decisions, not whether or not the money was allocated, not whether the department existed, but decisions within the department, then it is legitimate for Trump to do so. And all that's happened thus far is you've had essentially an audit where Elon Musk and others have looked through the spending under the supervision of the president, who is in charge of the executive branch, and said, here is what's being spent. There hasn't been an attempt to shut down or consolidate or move this agency. If there is, there will be a genuine constitutional question. And if the administration ignores the courts, maybe a constitutional crisis. But this just strikes me as being wildly premature.
Okay, so there's so much misinformation being shoved down people's throats about this. It's quite galling. I want to stick on this question of constitutional crisis for a second, and then we've got to get to the Biden standard on what one may do when it comes to the U.S. Supreme Court, which I do believe is another favorite of yours, Charles C.W. Cooke. So, Rich, let me give you another example of how this is being spun in the media. Last night there was a debate between the great Scott Jennings and the terrible Abby Phillips. It's just, I mean, talk about being out of your depth.
I hate that show. I love Scott, but I hate that show.
It's horrible. It's horrible. Whatever they're paying him, it's far too little. But here's an example of the media dialogue on this.
What I can't get with is you talking in these bizarre, broad generalities.
It's not bizarre.
Every single one of these cases deals with a discrete issue, okay? When the court says Congress, appropriated this money, you must unfreeze it while we litigate this, why can't Trump comply with that?
So you're saying that a judge should decide how and when money is spent
a judge is saying,
for years and not the president of the United States?
Let me explain
You're a governor,
a little bit more. Let me explain it a little bit more slowly. A judge is saying,
you don't have to talk to me like that.
Congress.
I have a position on this, and you have an opinion. We can disagree.
Yeah, but I'm saying you listen to me because you're not listening, and you're making claims that are not connected to the facts.
So while we litigate this, I'm a judge and I'm in charge of the executive branch, and you're not. Forget it.
So that gets to the question of whether the judge can force Trump to spend all the monies until he issues his ruling. And now we're getting a little closer to this federal district judge overstepping his bounds. I mean, for a week, sure, he can say that. Like, I want to see it briefed, send me your briefs. But this judge is not going to get away with slow rolling his opinion on this thing for the next year while this case plays out, potentially with discovery and so on, and effectively just undermine the president's power. No federal district judge is going to get away with that.
Yeah, well, you go up and you appeal it. And just, Megyn, one reason this is so absurd, well, first of all, it's just another case, right, where they come up with a meme, a catchphrase that they repeat over and over again, and they hope they'll make reality, right? We saw this all during the campaign. Kamala Harris is joyful. Everyone says joy, and she's joyful, and you hope that actually will make her joyful, or people think she's joyful. Right, brat. Same thing here, constitutional crisis. Like, it's last 24 hours, the memo clearly went out and everyone's saying constitutional crisis. But when they said that Trump was an existential threat to democracy for a year or two, I thought they were talking about he'd suspend congressional elections. He'd try to stay for a third term. It turns out just paring back foreign aid. that's the constitutional
and offering a
crisis.
Buyout to federal employees, saying, I'll pay you a lot more than you otherwise could get.
Yeah. So the Congress did not say, we have specifically appropriated money for a DEI program in Serbia, right? If they said that, that would not have gotten through Congress. So it's executive discretion to begin with on whether you're going to spend money on a Serbian DEI program, right? So if the executive made that call without Congress specifically commanding it, why can't a new president, a new executive, make the opposite call, right? So they want to play this game where one side can do it and has discretion, has executive authority, and the other side doesn't. And of course, that should be intolerable. No one should be willing to play that game, and Trump and Elon aren't.
So wait, I love what you just said. I've been trying to raise this point, but not as articulately on this show. They're so focused on what's like the good programs, like the laudable, the noble programs that are being stopped, like AIDS medication. If you listen to the Daily this morning, HIV medication to kids in Africa, they're relying on it. Now we're stopping it. Great. You can spend all day long highlighting that. What they don't highlight, and we'll get into the list, but is the absolute embarrassment of lists when it comes to what they used our money for that Trump is trying to stop while he figures out what the hell is going on. And the fact that it was their reckless spending, Rich, on causes that no one over here supports,
right,
that led to this crisis, that led to the next executive having to come in to say, hold on, I'm pressing pause on all of this because you people, the Democrats who controlled this group before me, have corrupted the program beyond recognition. No one's arguing really over HIV medication for children in Africa. If that's all USAID was doing, Trump would not have shut it down. But that's not what we have. We continue to face uncertainty when it comes to the economy, with a perfect storm brewing as Social Security and Medicare hit a breaking point, as the largest generation is hitting retirement. A smaller workforce means a smaller tax base. You pair that with our growing national debt and rising cost of living, and we could have a very big problem on our hands. So what are you doing now to protect your family for the future? Gold can be a safe haven in hard economic times, and Birch Gold makes it easy to diversify a portion of your savings into physical gold. Birch Gold will help you transition an existing IRA or 401k into an IRA in gold, and it does not cost you a cent out of pocket. Protect your future today. Text MK to 989898. Get your free info kit on gold and a copy of the ultimate guide for gold in the Trump era with a foreword by Donald Trump Jr. There's no obligation, just information. Birch Gold has earned the trust of countless Americans looking to safeguard their savings. Text my initials MK to the number 989898 today. Thanks so much for watching. If you like what you just saw, hit the subscribe button for more clips and full episodes.